Fuck you, guy. Not you.
That would be way out of line.
It would have been totally out of line.
But apparently LMS is down, so that might have been it.
This is the Information Services website, though. This is the library website. Is LMS down?
Yeah.
Does anything work?
Yeah, I just got an email saying it is.
I mean, it says full text online, right?
Yeah, maybe like if you sign in.
I shouldn't have to sign in. There we go. That is very misleading. Look, the print version should be available.
Was it the book rather than the article?
Hey?
Was it the book rather than the article?
What do you mean?
They said there was a book.
I can try the article.
I think we just looked at the article.
What's it called? Presentism and truthmaking? Hey, look, it's me. Just saying. Shit. All right, look, I'll sort this out. There were 2 readings, though, weren't there? Keller and Kellen. Keller was one of them, and the other one's Sanson and Kaplan, right? It's this one? Yeah, so just read that one for now, and I will try and get access to the 2014 paper. What are you starstruck about? Yeah. Read it first before you make a decision. That is a sad state of affairs, my friend. But also probably true. Thanks, Tom. One of these days I'm just going to snap, you know that, right? I don't remember what today's lecture is on, so this will be interesting, won't it? Cool. Sorry? All right. Let's roll, kids. All right. So last week I gave you a brief introduction to different models of time. So we looked at broadly 2 classes of models. We looked at dynamic theories of time and static theories of time. Dynamic theories of time have at least the following 2 features: a moving present and some kind of metaphysical difference between past, present, and future, right? The present is special in some way that the past and future are not. Static theories deny that time flows, right? They deny that the present moves in any metaphysically robust sense. And they also deny that there's anything metaphysically interesting or special about the present as compared to the past or future. Typically, static theorists will say things like, the term present is just an indexical, like now or here or I, right? It refers back to the time at which you say it is now 10 o'clock, but that referring back doesn't have any metaphysical significance in the same way that when I say we are here in the business building, which has so much more money than we are, it's kids. When I say that, I'm not saying anything metaphysically special about the business building. I'm not saying that there's some special property of here-ness which the business building has, right? Clearly that sounds a bit bonkers. So the static people think that that's similarly crazy in the time case. All right, we looked at some different options. Growing block, moving spotlight, branch attrition, presentism. Those are all the dynamic theories. Not all of the dynamic theories, but all the dynamic theories I outlined last week. Growing block theorists think that the sum total of reality is growing as time passes. Moving spotlight theorists think that the present moves across reality like a spotlight moving across a wall. And branch attrition people think that the flow of time involves the culling of future possibilities which are actualized as branches. Presentists think that only the present exists, past doesn't exist, future doesn't exist, and nevertheless the present changes, right? So time flows in a way to be explained. Eternalists, they're the static theorists. They say boo on all of the stuff that the other guys say. All right, so we're going to start digging into presentism. Presentism is the view that people love to hate in philosophy, probably for good reason. It seems to be rather inconsistent with science, and we will look at the incompatibility with science in a couple of weeks and look at how the presentist tries to get out of that one. But today I'm going to motivate presentism, and I'm going to look at the truthmaker objection, right? So this is the objection that I discussed briefly last week, according to which claims about the past are true, but it looks like there's nothing there to support their truth, no existing things to make claims about the past true. So we're going to expand on that a little bit, get a sense of what it is to make something true, get a sense of how it is that the presentist might try to give an account of truths about the past. All right, so this is presentism. The present is metaphysically special. It's metaphysically special in the sense that only the present exists, the past and the future don't exist. What's really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about presentism is that although they say the past and future don't exist, they do say the following: the past used to exist, and the future will exist, right? So Caesar used to be present. He used to be out there crossing the Rubicon. And sentient robots will exist, and they will destroy us all. Okay, so there are sort of three motivations for presentism that you can find in the literature, and I'm not putting these forward as good reasons to believe a theory. They are de facto the reasons that you find people who defend presentism put forward. And I think it's important to reflect on how seriously we should take these motivations. Some people take them very seriously, some people not so seriously at all. So the first one is that it accommodates temporal flow. All dynamic theories accommodate temporal flow in some way or another. The way the presentist accommodates temporal flow is to treat the flow of time as things coming into and going out of existence. So as things become present, they come into existence, and as they become past, they go out of existence. And the flow of time is this sort of, like if you imagine a series of slices or a series of cards, God's laying down different cards over time. You only ever see like the face of the card changing, but God is always putting down different cards. Things are coming into existence, going out of existence. It's actually quite similar to a religious view or a sort of way of thinking about God. There are positions in theology where they say things like God creates the world like at every moment. He's constantly creating the universe and recreating it. That's sort of like what the presentist is on about. Interesting sociological fact. Most presentists are religious. Don't ask me why. Second thing, it doesn't face the big bad bug, right? So this was the epistemic challenge that other dynamic theories faced that I was telling you about last week, right? So the growing block theory, the moving spotlight theory, the branch attrition theory, they all say that there's something special about the present, but more than just the present exists and the present moves, right, as time flows. And as a result of that, they all face this epistemic challenge. How do you know that you're objectively present? In fact, you should rationally conclude that you're not objectively present, because there's only ever one time that is objectively present. There's many times that aren't, so you should conclude that you exist in the past. You're about to ask a question. I can see it in your eyes.
You know how there's that thing where you don't know if your past is actually the past and wasn't just created just then to, like, we might have just come into existence
Yeah.
and all our memories of the past
Yeah.
have just been implanted. In presentism, would there be a difference between, like, actually having a past leading up to this moment and the past just being implanted?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So there are these sort of skeptical ideas, right? For all we know, the universe was created 5 seconds ago. I think Bertrand Russell banged on about this for a while. And you might wonder what the difference between presentism and that view is, if you can pull those two apart. In some sense, you can think of this stuff about truth-making as one way of trying to get a handle on that kind of issue, right? So one thing that the sort of Russellian skeptical position that you're talking about throws up is that all of the claims about the past that we take to be true are in fact false, right? So all of the evidence that was created 5 seconds ago comes into being, all of the scientific theories, all of our memories, all of that stuff was just created 5 seconds ago. There's no sense in which it's actually tracking facts about the past, because the past is only 5 seconds long, and yet all of that history seems to suggest a much longer, deeper past, right? So if you can solve the truthmaker objection, you can probably split presentism apart from those skeptical scenarios. If you can't, you probably can't split presentism apart from those skeptical scenarios. So that's one sort of extra motivation for trying to solve this problem that we're going to have a look at. Matthew?
Can you make any additional problem faces presentism in sort of defining what it, like, if you take presentism as sort of one line rather than a unit of time,
Mm-hmm.
then you've also got to sort of face reality that nothing ever happens in the present because things happen across units of time. So, say my thought happened across a millisecond or something,
Uh-huh.
then the present is never going to accommodate my whole thought. Whereas if you take
Yeah.
a box and say like a millisecond long, you then have to give a good argument as to why we chose a millisecond rather than a millisecond or a second.
Okay, so there are arguments against presentism of this form, right? So the idea is, look, conscious experience, let's go to conscious experience rather than thought per se. Conscious experience requires is typically extended across time. Presentist says that only a single instant exists, and by that they mean something that's durationless, right? So it doesn't have any temporal thickness, and they think it's like it's a continuum of slices coming into and going out of existence. So how do they have the sort of ontological width to support conscious experience? And some people have argued, in particular a gentleman named Neil McKinnon, who's an Australian, you'll be happy to know, argued that presentists can't support conscious experience. I'm not super swayed by these arguments. The reason I'm not super swayed by these arguments, and we can talk about this in more detail later on, is that if you think of conscious experience as just sort of series of brain events, right, then you can set up the following sort of dilemma. Either presentists can accommodate events that are extended across time, or they can't, right? If they can't, then they can't accommodate conscious experience. But, you know, if they can't accommodate events across time at all, then the problem is much bigger than anything to do with conscious experience. If they can accommodate events across time, then I'm inclined to think that they can just treat conscious experience as event-like and accommodate it that way. So the problem with conscious experience, either it's a general problem for everything the presentist is saying, or it's not a problem at all, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. The general problem also may be solved by the truthmaker issue, right? Because you might be able to say, well, look, it's true that the whole temporally extended event doesn't exist in the present, right? But think about the event as being segmented into parts. One part exists now, and the rest of its parts used to exist, and more parts will come into existence as time goes on, right? Each part's infinitely small, right? Each part is instantaneous, like it's durationless, right? But, you know, if you've got worries about that, then those are just worries about the continuum, and they're not the presentist worries, right? Well, that is Zeno's paradox, right? And insofar as that is a problem, then it's a problem for everybody. And probably we've got that one handled with things like measure theory, right? Okay, third, motivation. And what do we think about this one? I don't know, but this one is in the Zimmerman article that I gave you to read. It's quite explicit. That's why I gave that Zimmerman article to you to read, because he says this, like, he's of the people that believe this, he's the one that says it most upfrontly, whereas most people try and sweep this under the rug, I think. What he says is that we should believe presentism because it's the view that best accords with our common sense pictures of time. And he means two particular common sense intuitions that we have. First common sense intuition is that there's something metaphysically special about the present in an ontological sense, right? So there's something about existence and presentness that are deeply connected. And that intuition is best modeled with the presentist picture, right? Rather, the other pictures don't sort of fully do justice to the way in which the present is ontologically special compared to other parts of reality. And the second common sense intuition is that, he talks about this sort of dynamism as being an aspect of this common sense thing. So 1 and 3 may in fact be closely related. But I pull them apart because it's not obvious to me when they say that it accords with this sort of common sense intuition that we have that there's temporal flow. Whether they mean that to be based on the experience of temporal flow or not. And this one is typically based on the experience of temporal flow. The idea is that we have these experiences as of time passing, and that provides direct support for these views. Whereas these guys are talking about these common sense intuitions about time passing, and they may be wanting to pull that apart from the experience. I'm not entirely sure. Insofar as they aren't, 1 is subsumed under 3. Okay, so why are we talking about presentism, though? The reason I find presentism interesting, and I've spent probably a disproportionate amount of time talking about presentism than it's probably justifiable, I guess, is because I think it's a really interesting toy model for thinking about a range of cases in metaphysics. You have a whole bunch of interesting stuff happening with presentism that crops up in other areas of metaphysics. So the truthmaker objection that I'm talking about here turns up in other areas of metaphysics as well. Problems to do with relations across time for the presentist, which seem hard to make sense of because past things don't exist, so how can they be related to present things, turn up elsewhere as well. For example, when you're talking about fictions and you're talking about relations between fictional entities and us, you know, I feel sad because Sherlock Holmes solved the mystery and caught the bad guy. I'm always going for the bad guy. What relation do I stand in to the bad guy, right? What, Moriarty? Whatever. So issues that turn, and also there's a deep incompatibility with science with presentism, right? And so issues to do with metaphysics rubbing up against science in uncomfortable ways turn up really starkly in presentism. And so you can get a sort of general sense of how those problems might be solved or addressed or thought about by looking at how they play out in presentism. Presentism is just a really sort of clear model for thinking about this stuff, I think. Okay, as I said last week, there are 3 problems: truth, relations, and relativity. Of these, the relativistic one is taken to be the sort of nail in the coffin, I suppose. I guess I'm actually more swayed by 1. I think that 1 is worse than 3, but whatever. We'll look at all of them. Okay, so here's the truthmaker objection. Truth depends on being, right? That seems intuitive enough. The reason why it's true that Tom is wearing a blue shirt is that the fact that Tom is wearing a blue shirt, right? The truth Tom is wearing a blue shirt depends on Tom's wearing a blue shirt, that sort of worldly state of affairs. Similarly, that it's raining depends on the true claim that it's raining. It's not true now, but it will be. Depends on the existence of rain. Okay, so that's the first claim. Now, there's a bit of work to be done to make that precise, but I just want to give you a flavour for the intuition, right? That truth's got some connection to reality. Okay. Second claim, claims about the past are true. Okay, so this relates back to your skeptical scenario. If you deny 2, then amongst other things, you're forced to face that skeptical scenario, because if you don't if you don't have a way to make it the case that claims about the past are true, then you've got no way to rule out the kind of Russellian skeptical scenario. It may turn out that you can't rule it out anyway, but it's going to make things very hard if you're forced to think that all claims about the past are false. In fact, you might think it just forces you straightforwardly into that kind of Russellian skeptical scenario. Number 3, the past does not exist, right? So that comes out of presentism. Okay, so Caesar across the Rubicon is true, but what makes it true? So a little bit on this relation, this truth depends on being relation. So here's reality. Reality is always represented by a red square. And there's an arrow, right? This represents the dependence relation. And this is a proposition. Propositions are abstract objects, or at least I'm going to assume that they're abstract objects. They're sort of representations of things. And the truth of the proposition stands in some relation to reality, right? Reality makes this proposition true. And the way that there are 2 questions you can ask here. One question is, what's the nature of this relation? What does it mean to say that truth depends on being? And there are options, and I'll look at some of the options in a minute. The other thing is, what is the being on which truth depends? What parts of reality are candidates for underpinning the truth of claims about the past, or indeed about anything? Now, you might think that these answers are obvious. Well, probably you don't have a view about this question here. But you probably think that this question is fairly obvious. You know, it just depends on stuff that exists, right? The trouble with this is that there are some tricky cases to have to handle. One of the tricky cases is negative existential propositions or universal generalizations, which are equivalent to a negative existential. There are no unicorns, right? It's true, but what does its truth depend on? Sure as hell don't want to say it depends on unicorns, right? Because if you say that, then the truth of the claim brings the unicorns into existence. So it looks like it depends on, what, the absence of a unicorn? Okay, but if we're going to say that that's a part of reality, we've just called absences into existence, and I think that absences are as bad as unicorns, right? So what is the reality upon which the truth of there are no unicorns depends, right? Yeah, is it a reason to sort of doubt the idea that truth depends on being? Some people have thought so. I believe they're wrong. What they say is that you can restrict truthmaker theory, restrict the scope of truthmaker theory, right? So you can say that the truth of there are no unicorns doesn't depend on the existence of anything, right? But it's sort of true in virtue of the absence of a unicorn, without absences needing to exist. You have to sort of modify how the truthmaker theory works to make this operative. I just think that there are no unicorns has to depend on what exists, right? For the following reason: if there are no unicorns was false, unicorns would exist, right? So compare 2 worlds. One world in which there are no unicorns is true, and one world in which there are no unicorns is false, and there's an ontological difference between the worlds. And I'm inclined to think that if you've got truth sort of following an ontological difference in the world, right, sort of a consistent ontological difference, wiggle the truth of there are no unicorns, you end up wiggling reality. That looks to me like a good reason to think that there's some dependence going on between the truth and the world, right? Maybe it's not the exact dependence that these guys are on about, but still I think that there are no unicorns is tracking the facts in some sense. Okay, so second thing is, so usually people say that these are truth makers, right? Truth makers are states of affairs. They're just sort of like agglomerations of things plus properties, right? And you can see why that's going to be problematic in the unicorn case, because it doesn't look like there's any thing plus properties that is going to make it true that there are no unicorns. Necessitation is what is typically plugged in for this relation. And necessitation is a necessary connection between 2 different things, and the truthmaker principle is usually framed like this in terms of necessity. For any proposition P, if P is true, then there exists something E such that necessarily, if E exists, then P is true, right? So in all possible worlds in which E exists, P is true. So think about the claim that Tom is wearing a blue shirt. In every possible world in which the claim Tom is wearing a blue shirt is true, Tom is wearing a blue shirt. Okay? That's what that says, basically. Now, it seems sort of trivial and obvious, right? But it does not work for negative existentials, because there is nothing on the face of it that necessarily co-varies across worlds with the truth of a negative existential, like there are no unicorns. So it's not the case that in every world in which there are no unicorns, there's something that exists that makes that claim true, right? unless you want to bring into existence non-unicorns, like absences of unicorns, or indeed unicorns. Yes, Matthew?
Could you shape the statement, unicorns don't exist, it's a statement that of everything exists in the world, none of them exist.
Yeah, could you say that there are no unicorns means of everything that exists, there are no unicorns, or it's sort of, it won't work exactly like that. That's still got sort of there are no unicorns built into it. But there's something in the neighborhood that might work. So David Armstrong, who is responsible for popularizing and defending truthmaker theory in philosophy, he argues that there's no necessary covariance with there are no unicorns and like any existing thing. But you can add something into the ontology to get the covariance that you want. And what he adds in is a totality fact. And totality facts, sort of like stop clauses. Imagine you're listing all of the things that exist in the universe, right? And you get to a point and you say, that's it, right? Nothing else exists apart from the things I've listed, right? Totality facts are these things that say, these are all the things that exist, right? And you sort of stop the list there. And his claim is that the world plus a totality fact is going to necessarily covary with the truth that there are no unicorns, right? Which is, I think, is in the neighborhood of what you're suggesting, right? That there's something that sort of tells you that there are no unicorns, but it's also a thing, but it's not an absence per se. It's like some extra fact that the world has. There's sort of issues there that you're going to have to face, like what the hell is a totality fact, right? Isn't that as mysterious as a non-unicorn? Isn't that just like an absence in another with another name, right? But that's sort of in the ballpark of Armstrong's solution. Tom? No? Okay. Cool. All right. So as I said, for any proposition P, if P is true, then there exists something E such that necessarily if E exists, then P is true. So in every possible world, right? And the necessity here is wide open. The necessity here is not physical possibility. It is not metaphysical possibility, if metaphysical possibility is a restricted modality. It is full-blown logical possibility. Every possible world. Okay? That's important because some people mistake this for a restricted modality. So they might say, you know, in all of the physically possible worlds, there are no unicorns, and so this claim is true that there are no unicorns. But that's not going to be enough, right? It's going to have to be that there are no unicorns is true at a world, any world whatsoever, when there are no unicorns, not just the physically possible worlds. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Okay, so there we go. There's our unicorn. And we've got this question about what is the E in the truthmaker principle that exists to make this true. Now, these negative existential cases are really important for the presentist. They're really important for the presentist because they bear a striking similarity to what's going on with the past for the presentist, right? So when we're talking about there are no unicorns around to make that claim true. So in virtue of what is it true? So when the presentist says Caesar crossed the Rubicon is true, and there is no Caesar around to make that claim true, you have to tell a story about in virtue of what is it true, right? So you might think that the sorts of solutions that people have proposed for the negative existential case may well carry over to the past case, right? The sorts of things that allow you to make it true that there are no unicorns are also going to get you out of strife with the past. Tom?
With the truthmaker principle, do you lose anything by changing the word something to a state of affairs? Because I think it also solve issues where you say things like he is, Jeffrey is angry, unless you wish to claim there's a physical entity known as Jeffrey's anger. You know, I think the restrictions are quite a lot to say if you actually find something.
Something. Okay, so you want to replace something with state of affairs or something like that. Yeah, look, if you read that in a very restricted way, then I agree, like, it's too restrictive to handle most truths. That's just sort of a loose way of formulating this principle. I suppose if you want to really tighten it up, and Armstrong really does tighten it up in the way that you're suggesting, you replace something, you specify that the something E has to be a state of affairs.
But surely a state of affairs can be such that there are no unicorns.
Can it? Can a state of affairs be such that there are no unicorns? I'm not entirely sure what it means to say that there is a state of affairs such that there are no unicorns. But state of affairs is a thing that exists, right? Some sort of, like, you know, part of the world, right? What is the part of the world such that there are no unicorns is true?
Right. No, I would consider a state of affairs to be more
Yeah, even if it's the whole world, you're still going to have to add something, right? Because the whole world, like the whole universe, taken as a whole, right? It's not the case that in every possible world where exactly what exists actually exists, right? There are no unicorns is true. Why? Because we could take the whole universe and we could take that whole thing and put it into another universe, into another world where you've got two universes that are disconnected, and in one of the universes there are no unicorns, and in the other universe there are unicorns. And what you'll end up having is a possible world with two island universes in which there are no unicorns is false, even though everything that exists actually exists at that world. In other words, the sum total of existing things does not necessarily co-vary with the absence of unicorns, because you always add a unicorn to the way that the sum total of existing things is, and you would have a world with unicorns, right? But add a totality fact, right? Add a that's all clause, that's all folks, and you might get around that problem, right? But then you're back to having to answer the question, what's a totality fact anyway, right? Okay, so here's one way around these sorts of problems, okay? And this is along the lines of what Matthew was suggesting, I think, but not the totality fact suggestion. The other suggestion, so there's sort of three options for dealing with the case of non-unicorns. You can say that absences exist, whatever that is. You can go for negative facts, right? So you can say that there is some fact that exists that is like the fact that there are no unicorns, right? You could just sort of add that into your ontology. Again, I think that that's as mysterious as just adding an absence or the lack of unicorn in. Or you can go for non-maximalism. Also, I should have totality facts in here as well, but we talked about totality facts. So non-maximalism is to restrict the scope of truthmaker theory. So rather than saying that truth always depends on being, well, you still say that, but what you say is that not every truth requires the existence of something. Okay? So you treat truth, you sort of water down the relation connecting truth and reality to something a bit weaker. So this relationship is necessitation, right? So which leads to necessary covariance of the P and the E across all worlds. You can replace it with supervenience, and you can say the following. For any proposition P and any worlds W and V, if P is true in W but not in V, then either something exists in one of the worlds but not in the other, or else some entiple of things stands in some relation in one of the worlds or not in the other, right? So the other principle required the existence of a thing for every true proposition. This one allows the absence of a thing to make a proposition true without calling that absence into existence, because all you're looking at is sort of modal variation between worlds. So you've got two worlds, W and V, right? There's some claim that's true at one world and false at the other world. All this principle requires is that there's some ontological difference between the two worlds. So how's this going to handle the unicorn case? Get a world in which there are no unicorns is true, and a world in which there are no unicorns is false, right? All this principle demands is that there's some difference between the two worlds ontologically, and what's that difference going to be? Unicorns exist in one world but not in the other, right? So this doesn't require the existence of a thing at every world to make a claim true. Rather, you look at pairs of worlds and you see how they differ. And any difference in truth has to be tracked by a difference in what exists. Yeah.
Could you amend the truthmaker principle to say that statements about the existence of things have to be based on the existence of things?
Could you amend the truthmaker principle to say that statements about the existence of things have to be based on the existence of things?
So, like, if I make a statement about something existing, so
Yeah.
say electrons exist, I make a statement about
Oh, I see. I see. I see.
I'm making a statement about electrons not existing. I'm not making a statement about things existing. I'm making a statement about absence of existence.
Yeah, okay, you could, so what you would be doing in this case is adding a kind of relevance constraint into truth making. What you're saying is that it's not just the case that a proposition has to be true in virtue of something. It has to be true in virtue of the very thing that it seems to be about, right? I'm not entirely sure that will get you out of trouble with negative existentials, because even when you say, like, okay, so there are no unicorns has to be true in virtue of sort of the absence of unicorns, because that's what it's about, right? But what is that? What is the absence of unicorns that it's true in virtue of, right? This principle, you never have to face that question, because this principle is just far less demanding. It doesn't demand as much from you, yeah?
Are there claims about the world that are neither claims about the presence nor claims about the absence of things? Could you formulate
Are there claims?
presence and be
are there claims about the world that aren't about the presence or absence of something? Let me get back to you. I'll have a think by the end of the lecture. I'll give you an example. Okay, so this is just about modal variation. Different worlds have different truths, and that just requires different stuff. Okay. Supervenience generally is modal variation. So this is just the definition of supervenience. It's a technical term in philosophy. So if you don't know what this means, here we go. A supervenes on B, just in case there cannot be a difference in A without a difference in B. So the supervenience version of the truthmaker principle says that truth supervenes on being just when you can't have a difference in truth without a difference in being, right? So claim like there are no unicorns, the truth of that supervenes on what exists, just in case were you to change the truth value to false, you'd have to take something out of existence like unicorns. All right, so the strongest truthmaker objection against presentism can be formulated using the weakest truthmaker principle. And the weakest truthmaker principle is the supervenience-based principle. And so what I've done is reformulate the objection without the strong sort of necessitation version of the principle. The reason I've done that is for the following reason. Here's a response to the truthmaker objection against presentism. The objection goes like this. Presentists can't provide truthmakers for claims about the past. So because we have this demand that a truth always has a truthmaker, it looks like presentists don't get to say that claims about the past are true, right? Because they lack truthmakers. The response to this is to say something like, look, negative existentials, like there are no unicorns, everyone's got problem finding truthmakers for those, right? So there's no truthmakers for those as well. So either you can't provide truthmakers for those, but then it's unsurprising that you can't provide truthmakers for claims about the past. So that's not the presentist problem. Or you can provide truthmakers for those, in which case you'll be able to find truthmakers for claims about the past as well. So either way, it looks like the presentist either doesn't have to face the problem because it's not her problem, or the problem's solved by someone else doing something else. I'll come to you in a sec, Matt. So how do we get around that? Well, you formulate it with a version of the truthmaker principle which handles negative existentials, right? The supervenience-based truthmaker principle does handle negative existentials, but it craps out when you get to claims about the past, right? So here's the objection. Some propositions about the past are true. The truth of propositions about the past supervenes on being. If presentism is true, then the truth of propositions about the past does not supervene on being, therefore presentism is false. So what reason do we have to buy premise 3, right? Here's the reason we have to buy premise 3. Take two presentist worlds, world 1 and world 2. In world 1, C's across the Rubicon is true. In world 2, C's across the Rubicon is false. What is it that exists in one world but not the other, such that you've got this difference in truth value, right? Can't be Caesar, because Caesar doesn't exist in either world. So it has to be something else. What could it be, right? So it looks like you've got exactly the same problem. And you haven't had to request truth makers. All you've used is actually a fairly weak modal principle of modal variation in order to formulate the problem. Tom, Brody. I keep getting you sort of... oh, that's his name, but I keep getting it mixed up with Brady. Brody, because he hasn't asked a question yet.
Can't we kind of get around that, because doesn't the supervenience principle say that either that's true or there's an n-tuple changes because of something?
Mm-hmm.
So if we change the fact that Caesar crossed the Rubicon so that he didn't cross the Rubicon, wouldn't you then have flow on? Or is that not possible because it's presentism? And then
So okay, so you do need another principle in here, right? The principle is something like I'm going to call it independence, right? The present is independent of the past in the following sense: the very same things could exist in the present, even though the past was different, right? Now, the reason why you might think this is true is because we're dealing with all of the possible worlds, right? If you deal with just the physically possible worlds, then it's probably false, because determinism about the laws of nature is going to cut against you, right? Because determinism about the laws of nature will say that given what exists in the present, run the laws of nature backwards and you can guaranteed to get a certain past, right? But if we're talking about all the possible worlds, right, we're not just talking about physical possibility, then there are going to be worlds with different laws that have exactly the same ontology in the present but differ with respect to the past, right? So I can see what you're trying to do. By getting that flow on, you're trying to get like some snowball effect by which the present ends up being different, right? But there's two things. One thing is that it may only work if you've got determinism about the laws. Having said that, we will look at an option that's along these lines. Second thing is that that's a solution, right? That's still a way of solving the problem. This is still just outlining the problem, right? So there are solutions, but hopefully you feel the pressure of the problem enough to offer a solution, okay? All right, so let me just go through some solutions. You can ask your questions after, guys, because we're just running a bit short of time. So, first solution. This is similar to the one that you're thinking about, Brody. You deny P3, right? So you deny that if presentism is true, then the truth propositions does not supervene on being. When you deny that, what you effectively say is that when you vary the truth of a claim about the past, you do vary the way things exist in the present, right? Now, if you say this, you then have to tell a story about what it is that varies between worlds in which claims about the past, when you've got this variation in claims about the past. The most prominent version of this response is by a guy called John Bigelow, who develops this view called Lucretian presentism. And what he says is that the present contains primitive properties that do truth-making work, like the property having been unwell, which is possessed by Susie now, right? So consider the claim that Susie was sick, right? What Bigelow says is that the present contains the property, Susie in the present contains the property of having been unwell, right? The way he puts it sort of metaphorically is that the present is pregnant with the facts about the past, okay? And you can think of this in sort of this snowballing way, right? Sort of when Susie was unwell, there was a time in the past when she was unwell, right? So when the present was back then, she was unwell. And that gave rise to this property of having been unwell in the next moment, and then that gets carried forward into the present. And so when you vary worlds, vary truth across worlds, what you're doing is you're varying these primitive tensed properties, okay? Right, I call this the hard road to presentism because I think it's very difficult to develop this position plausibly. One reason I think it's very difficult to develop this position plausibly is because I don't know what tense properties are. Right? What is the property of having been unwell? It's got to be a monadic property. It can't be a relation of any kind, right? So it's got to be a monadic intrinsic property, right? So it's got to be like, so this chair is orange. Orange probably is not an intrinsic property. Let's just engage in the fiction that it is for a moment. This chair is orange, right? And that's an intrinsic property that you can sort of, you know, have fun with. But having been unwell would have to be a property like that, right? And I don't really know what kind of a property that is. Okay. So present is like a snowball gathering snow, collecting tense properties as it goes. Okay, so here's one trouble with the hard road. Truth-making is supposed to be explanatory. The truth of proposition is explained by its truth-maker, or the being on which a truth depends is supposed to explain why the proposition is true, right? So when I say that it's true that Tom is wearing a blue shirt, the fact that he's wearing a blue shirt explains why it is that that claim is true, right? It doesn't look like tense properties are really fit to do the relevant explanatory work, or at least this is the objection you'll find in that Sanson and Kaplan paper that I've set for you to read. In that paper, what these guys argue is that a property of having been unwell that Susie has in the present doesn't really on its own explain why it is that the claim Susie was unwell is true, right? At least it doesn't explain it directly. Insofar as it does explain it, it explains it indirectly by telling you that there was a time in the past at which she had the property of being unwell, right? But then it looks like all of the explanatory work is being done by things in the past and how things were, and it's not things in the present that are doing the explanatory work. And then it looks like the truth-making work is being done by the past, but if the truth-making work is being done by the past, then the past is going to get called into existence to meet the call. All right, I'm just going to skip over that last one. So the other option is what I'm going to call the easy road. The easy road is to deny that the truth of propositions about the past even supervenes on being, right? So the first restriction on truth-maker theory was to deny that every proposition had a truth-maker. The second restriction on truth-maker theory, which is much more extreme, is to deny that all truths have to come to rest in what exists, that all truths have to depend on being. So this view is defended by a guy called Jonathan Talent, who argues that claims about the past are true, but you don't have to provide anything in the world, any ontology, any being, to sort of tell a story about in virtue of what those claims are true, right? They're just sort of brute facts, right? And you don't have, you just sort of blatantly resist the urge to explain why it is that claims about the past are true in other terms by like calling some ontology into existence. It's called the easy road because you don't have to go about finding truth makers or finding ontology or finding anything to make claims about the past true. You just sort of stamp your foot and deny that you need to engage in any such project, right? Okay, there are a couple of problems with the easy road. One problem is that it's typically motivated via the negative existential case. So what these guys say is that, look, claims about unicorns don't require anything to make them true. So because we've got a motivated restriction there, we can restrict truth-maker theory a little bit further and restrict it in the case about claims about the past. But there's a substantial disanalogy between the unicorns case and this case. And the disanalogy is that in the unicorns case, you do really want to say that the truth of there are no unicorns supervenes on being, right? You don't want to deny that. Because if you deny that, then here's what you deny. That a world in which there are no unicorns is true and a world in which there are no unicorns is false, differ in the following respect. There are unicorns in one world and not in the other world, right? So you do not want to deny that there are no unicorns supervenes on being. But you do want to deny that claims about the past supervene on being. So a restriction in the no unicorns case is not going to motivate the kind of restriction you have in the past case, because the kind of restriction you have in the past case is